Let's do this, folks. Welcome. What we're looking at today is what's going on under the hood with Star Trek Adventures, and what do I think 2-20 games in general, but especially the way that Star Trek Adventures is written. Sort of what sort of game in RPG theory they are, and sort of how I think that the game design is pushing player behavior, and that includes the game master. There's some stuff encoded into it, and I think that this is a very modern game, and it's made in consultation with stuff that you might be familiar with that's out there. So if you know about Powered by the Apocalypse, it's a very modern RPG. It's one of those narrative games, but it has a very old school principle at its heart, where it's thumping and beating, and that principle is that to do the thing, you do the thing. So in other words, as the character, you just narrate until you get to the place where the game master says you need to roll. So in Powered by the Apocalypse, everybody's character has moves, and so you're reaching for a particular thing that's on your sheet that you know will get you a roll, and then there's basic moves that are out there that anybody can use as well. But in Star Trek Adventures, it's a little bit less defined, but the course of play is still the same. It's that you narrate what your character is doing as the player, and once you get to a point where you've done a thing that is challenging for a hero of the genre, a heroic person of the genre, then that is a difficulty 1 task. Now, there's other ways that this can come about. I mean, the opposite is also true. So, there can be a trait in a scene, and we're going to see like a character catches the common cold, and that trait can kind of cause them to have to make tasks where they wouldn't. And that's sort of one of the ways that a saving throw or like a game master prompted roll can come into this game also. And that's one of the cool things, is that even if you're not creating a complication, creating traits in a scene, like I delved really deep, and I dug this up a little while back. I found that creating any trait in a scene after you set the scene frame, and I'll give a little bit of background for that if you're not familiar with it. Another sort of interesting principle of Star Trek Adventures is that it's all in on a dramatic premise. And so by that, I mean that the idea is that you start where there's a point of tension, where there's some question as to what the outcome is. And so at that point, the game master describes the scene. So that's your place where you can lay out some traits, and those traits could make it so that a character is sick, or that you start and you're in the middle of a nebula and really ordinary scanning that would not be difficult. It takes a task in this context. If the characters are trekking across a vast desert, and just simply walking from point A to point B could be a fitness task if you set the environment traits up that way. And the interesting thing is that characters carry around traits themselves. Equipment is one of those things, and that can work in the opposite direction. So I've played some really interesting sessions recently where we've had an Andorian officer and a Tellarite officer, and you can invoke the species trait, and you can say, well, maybe you do need to make a task here because it's very hot for you. Maybe this is very comfortable coming from a jungle, dark environment for a Tellarite character. And that's one of the ways that, even though the stat line, the kind of what's encoded into the mechanics of the game seems relatively small in Star Trek Adventures when it comes to what we think of as race in characters, invoking that trait as the game master or suggesting it be invoked as a player is a really fun way to bring that in. And it has a really big effect because With the middle of the road at difficulty 1 tasks, that means that if you deviate in either direction, it really starts to make a big impact once, a trait is found to really, if the trait is going to matter, it's going to matter quite a bit because of how this is quantized. So I think I finally found where I was in the rule book. And this is sort of my proof of reading for this Powered by the Apocalypse stuff. So let's reveal that, and then we'll take a look at stream chat after that. So it looks like there's some folks around, and I'm going to say hi actually first. So Stephen Cooper says, Blackboard. That's funny because the black background in the print rulebook is it's not my favorite for reading. I think that it might be really fun actually, like to read like as a physical book, and I think that might get you in a Star Trek mood. But at the table, I'm just so used, like I have so many years of looking at white background and dark text, and kind of like the memory palace in my mind sort of works that way. So let's turn off Powered by the Apocalypse. Like we're not listening for moves. We're not trying to do the thing until we get to a move, which in PBTA you kind of are forcing your hand on what happens in the game. So that's why you want to arrive at a move in that game. Now, in Star Trek Adventures, you don't necessarily want to force anything to happen, and you have a lot of technology on your hands. There's something encoded in the way the text is set up, and that you are competent if you have enough time, if you have enough supplies, if you have enough help. If no one's going to interrupt you, then you're not going to have any problems. So let me know about the resolution here. I can make some things bigger, and I am curious about that. We're getting some hang time here. OBS is hang. Okay, it's moving again. So this is the core of play. Game Master frames the action. This is where you set up the traits, and this is where you describe it. And then you formalize, the stuff that's going on that could be a trait. And advantages is an interesting one. A security officer, you can spell it out to the player by saying you have this advantage that you've got this guy locked up, and he is a career criminal, and he knows that if he tells you that you have this advantage, you have ready to flip. You can name these traits in a way that sounds fun or works. And I have a few. I did this really super formally when I first started playing, and I even made like kind of scene cards where I had like a picture of the scene and I wrote down the traits, and so the characters could see them, and then that way the players could ask about them. Nowadays, I kind of go through this a little bit more by the seat of the pants, and that's a place where you can blow by these things and kind of miss the opportunity to describe traits. And it's important because if you're going to force people to make tasks on things that otherwise wouldn't, they should probably know that trait is there, because then they can start working on making the trait not true. Because that's the other fun thing about this, is that the game says you can change reality. I mean, after all, it is Star Trek. You can create like a graviton flux capacitor that everybody wears on an armband, and then everybody's good to go. So players take actions. This is the Powered by the Apocalypse. This is the do the thing part of the game. And why do you want to do the thing? Well, this is where I'm going to start talking to you. I'm going to start talking a little bit more about my experience of play. Let's turn off these things. Okay. So the game is set up. You start the session with 6 threat. The player characters, as they attempt really difficult things, as they get to the crunch of what's hard, if you set up something that's a mystery to be unraveled, if you set up a very strong Klingon warrior who's holed up in a control room, there's going to be some difficulty 3 or 4 tasks. There's crunch time that is encoded into, 1, the idea that there is the scene frame, and 2, that you get that free pool of threat at the beginning of the game. You 2 for every character at the beginning, and this can kind of build up by things becoming more intense. By our group likes to call it the music playing, as things get more and more pulse pounding. And so crunch time is going to come. The hard stuff is going to come. So you, or I shouldn't say you, but the player wants to seek out things that are challenging. They want to look for things that they like can't do. And that's where momentum comes into play. They want to seek out things that they don't have enough supplies for, that they don't have enough time for, that are hard and heroic. Because if they hit a difficulty one task, if they kind of narrate it right, and this is higher level stuff. This is like it's behind the curtain. I'm not saying that this is like written into the rule book or you should play this way, but that this is the way the dog is being wagged. It's like Platonic in the Republic. Plato says, like shadows on the wall, not the light of day, but here we are down in the cave, and this is what the shadows on the wall are telling us: is that if you can hit a difficulty one task, you can get some momentum, which will make when crunch time comes along, you'll have some momentum. And so that is how I think that's where things are being pushed in the back of the player's mind. I think that's sort of in the back of the way that the characters want to accomplish their mission. I think that's partially what's going on. So let's look at stream chat, and then we're going to dive into some really specific stuff about tasks. We've got lots of stream chat here. How do you avoid this trope of scanners don't work or transporters don't work, and not have the characters scan the area when you want to have an ambush? So one of the things that I would say is, so one of them, okay, this is a fun one, okay, is that there's a couple of ways, and I think we might actually just kind of really get deep on this. So let's just move to my Q&A slide, and I think we might just focus on this for now, before we move on to the PowerPoint part of this. All right, so the question is, how do you avoid just kind of using the no stick? One of them is to play it out. And by that I mean, instead of just setting up a trait that says, gravimetric interference is making the scanner not work. One of them is that you can, instead of setting that trait at the beginning of the scene, you can show that is kind of costly, that it's making something happen in the economy of the game. So you can spend the threat. If the players beam down and they're in an away team, and you set it up at the beginning of the scene, scanners aren't going to work. Oh man, that's tropey. But if when they get to a crunch and and they feel like there's a danger there, if you spend down to 4, threat at that moment, and that trait comes into play there, the tricorder starts chirping and making little alarm bells going off, then that means that there are that many fewer hazards out there. So that's the other thing, is that there's only so much effects budget. There's TV is sort of almost encoded into part of the way the game works. And so the player sees that, and that means that they can be a little bit bolder and they can come up with things. Maybe they're going to then buy extra dice to create an advantage. Because there's less threat, they might buy extra dice with threat to create an advantage to nullify the interference. And that beat can go down right there. That's the interesting thing about the economy, is that I think it's an important thing where it's like, oh, great. Why do we always go into places where we are blind as a bat? And I think the answer is that people of Star Trek don't. They think that they've got this, and then the stories that we see involve kind of tough circumstances. And so I think that one of the ways to do that is to do the spend. So let's catch up. Yes, background on the rulebook. It's hard in I would have said it that way too. Okay. So you guys are talking pros and cons. My plan is at some point when I finally get to play this game face to face, because I've been doing it in Roll20 and in the internet with my internet group. My plan is to hopefully get the print on demand white copy from drive-through. But it's just a point of preference. I mean, it's a really nice looking book, the special edition. Like I can't argue with the quality of the physical product that Modifius is putting out. The physical stuff is great. Okay, so yeah, false sensor readings is that's an interesting sensor ghosts. So that's another way to set it up, is that it looks one way in the scene frame, kind of as they materialize through the transporter. It can look one way, and then the spend is instead to that's an interesting. You could just set it up that way with the trait being. You can kind of have like traits that just are XX, like they're it's just like a hidden password. You can have kind of hidden password traits, and if you look at Runeslinger's channel and some of his recaps from his sessions, that is one thing that he's done, is kind of had mystery trait, and that's a thing that I've contemplated too. Okay, so the threat spend to avoid the trope. It's like it's not really avoiding the trope. Okay, so that's the thing. So this is not a perfect answer. Okay, so that's the first thing that I want to point out. But the idea is that if you do spend to invoke that there's something in the way, then that means that there's fewer threat particles bouncing around in the ecosystem. And then yeah, I think false sense. It's very similar. Suffice it to say. So the idea is that if there's fewer threat bouncing around in the ecosystem, then the player knows that like an opportunity, like they have more opportunities. Essentially, like by you paying your opportunity cost, there is a certain sort of feeling that the tension is down and they can take more risks, or that whatever is hiding behind those false sensor readings is it's going to be less crazy, and so they can continue to kind of act heroically, or they can take some risks, like I'm going to reconfigure my tricorder to try and get the sensors working. Now in that moment where that turns over, that can create more threat. That can be that it's like it's getting hot out here. People are starting to take stress because they're kind of in a hostile environment while that's going on. I'm thinking of kind of conversations between Geordi and Riker, where it's like Geordi says, "Well, I think I could, rig something up to get this working," and Riker's like, "No, we should go in blind, man. You'd like this, we got this." And so Riker's kind of saying like the threat count is kind of low. I think it'll be okay. This is, so the interesting thing, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is that I have experimented with having an indistinct threat count where it's just a gauge, and the players can ask how many absolute number it is, but it changes it changes how people act and play. Whether they know it exactly, or whether they just know it's high, or it's low, or it's next to zero. So you're saying they want to scan, GM spends threat, sensor doesn't work, and then yeah, I mean, essentially, I mean, I won't want to call it metagame, because it's there. Like in the rules of the game, it is absolutely set up that the players know how much threat is there, and so the quantum of what that threat can do. If 2 threat equals a trait, then there's a sense of like the Starfleet officer. If you want to look at it from an in-character perspective, the Starfleet officer, it knows that there's the risks are controlled. The Starfleet officer inside of them is saying that I can say, beam me up. like, or captain, this situation, like the Starfleet officer in them says, I need like we need to beam down extra security personnel, and the scene can turn over like that, and then it would be kind of a new scene, and time will have gone on. And so that's sort of a way of like thinking of like how much threat is in the pool from an in character perspective. I think I'm going to get into the PowerPoint, and maybe a little bit more of this will become clear. But I think basically time has taught me that when it comes to this game, like this, it is sort of metagaming is encoded into the game in the same way that, like what I was saying with Powered by the Apocalypse, if a player knows that like Handshake of Friendship is on their character sheet, they have to narrate towards a situation where Handshake of Friendship is happening. In Powered by the Apocalypse, like that would be like a move that a character has. In the same way, players, like, so the player of the guy with Handshake of Friendship is going to be is basically metagaming towards making a Handshake of Friendship happen. Like by keep saying the story, keep saying more actions that the character does until it happens, until the move triggers. And I think in the same way, the players the players and the characters sort of have this sense of what's in the pool, of what's in the various pools. When it comes to momentum, it's absolutely, I think, what momentum is your friends have got your back. Your friends have set you up. The helm task in Starship Combat is that just the guy at the helm is he's got that difficulty 0 role, and he's gotten the tactical officer into an ideal position. And so the momentum is sort of an abstraction there. So that's the momentum side of it. And I think it's pretty easy to see how it's not sort of out of character knowledge, but it's just an abstraction of something that the characters sense and feel. And I think threat is pretty similar to that. Let's go deep, and let's get this presentation started. Over here. So hopefully, nope, wrong card. Okay, that looks okay. So hopefully this is going to look basically right. And unfortunately, I'm blind, but when this rolled over, I think I did see myself in frame. But this is sort of full screen. So this is slides for us to consult about the rules, about what's going on with sort of what triggers a task. And this is about kind of how do you get to roll a difficulty 0 task? Because the default state is that you don't. And so the game master, it's totally up to the game master whether difficulty 0 is going to happen. Okay, but this is this episode story, which I think will maybe bring some of this to light. So we got 6 threat in the pool, and there's a gas giant, and the NX-01 Enterprise is flying towards it, and they come up with some readings, some anomalous readings. Deep in the body of the gas giant, there's a crashed star, and into a shuttle pod, and away team goes. It is Reed, Hoshi, and T'Pol. Now Reed, the game master spends some threat, and Reed has this complication on him that he is coming down with the common cold, and the player is the character and the player are sort of insistent, I'm going to do this. Maybe they challenge a value. Maybe the player proposes a value complication. I'm going to talk about that rule and why I think it's really useful. And the player says, no, I think I should go even though I'm not feeling well. Like this is, I have the skills. Like the best man for the job should go, might be the value for that. And so, this is most suited, the most suited person should do the task is maybe the complication that's then going to go on their character. And the guy now has an extra point of determination. And so here we have Lieutenant Reed. The threat pool is down to 4, and Reed has 2 points of determination now. Like he's that much more in his element. We know that much more that he's confident, and if he sets his mind to something, even though he's got this problem, he's going to be able to put his teeth into it because he has that determination. So the Klingon bird of prey that they find in the gas giant is sinking. The crew have perished almost to a man, but Captain Archer has this idea that maybe they can prevent the whole thing from being crippled, and that way they can bring home the dead to Kronos, which, as naive as they are, they don't know that that the Klingons don't care. So they start setting themselves to the task, and it's hot down there. The ship is starting to crumple so maybe the vessel is taking stress with over at like every 5 minutes or so. But the interesting thing is that at some point, the game master spends down maybe the rest of his threat and says that it's really sinking. Like the ship will blow up at in 20 minutes unless you do something. So then we get to this point where Reed is trying to figure out what's going on a control panel on the bridge. And he has to, it becomes a task where it wouldn't, because he has the common cold. He's forced to make a task over things that should be easy. Now, likewise, this also happens, I think there's a little horror movie moment in this episode where Hoshi basically, in a moment of exploring, she's making a difficulty 0 roll to look around a corner, and she rolls a complication. She gets frightened, and it takes a while for that to come off, and T'Pol has to make a difficulty 2 command task, essentially. So that's some of the examples to kind of get Hoshi under control. She does some sexy Vulcan neuropressure because it was the early 2000s, and that's how TV was. And Hoshi kind of pulls herself together and learns a little bit about Vulcans. So as the ship is sinking, things are getting more critical. And so there's the stack of traits, and there's different things going on. And it can be that in a situation like this, you might invoke the time challenge mechanic, or you might say, every time someone attempts attack, you can add threat to the pool to represent that things, the ship is sinking more. And at some point, you'll get to the point where, in this situation, if you had 6, 6 is that's a reversal. So that means that the scene has ended. And so that's sort of the value. That's how much it costs to say that things have spun out of control. Now, you shouldn't do that all the time, and I prefer to play out what happens next. I prefer to spend that 6th threat and put hard stuff happening in the scene instead of ending it. But that's sort of the quantum level that you're leaping over. So now, I think we'll let's head over back to the stream chat and see how things are shaping up, and see if there's a little bit more clarity, and if that filled in some interesting stuff. Okay, I like having the situation determining the difficulty of mundane tasks. So if it is mundane, and this is where we should go back to our slides actually. And in this case, I'm going to be looking at the slides. No, I can do this. So this is where I think it would be valuable to take a look at this. All right. That's not the worst. Yeah, let's just leave it like this so that I'm not completely underwater and I can see the chat. Okay. So if you have sufficient time and correct tools, and you can concentrate, and so one of the things that happened was that Reed couldn't concentrate. Hoshi couldn't concentrate because of her fear, and so it became a task. If you have these things, they can do anything because they're Starfleet people. They have technology, unlimited technology, and they have this super hyper elite training. The idea is that we are seeing super great people that have been through Delta Force levels of modern sci-fi versions of being in Delta Force or the like. And so it's something is getting in their way when it's a task. So If you have those things, then it isn't. That's a important point. So that's where it leaps from not a task to difficulty 1. And so that's sort of that's kind of what I was hoping maybe this part of the stream will kind of bring out. So that's not all that the game says, and I think these are important ones. So if there's a situation for a character where the success is in doubt or failure and complications are interesting. So this is sort of your classic, like, when shouldn't you roll the dice in any RPG? Like, don't make somebody roll for the dice unless these things are up. So that's okay. So the next layer of this, okay? And this is the saving throw thing. So the first point here is the task is trying to achieve something. So that's what we've been talking about in general, is that the player, through their character and in character role playing, are talking about how they're trying to do Star Trek stuff. And at some point they try and do a Star Trek thing that they might fail at, that there might be complications, and they don't have enough time or enough concentration or enough technology or whatever. And so then it becomes, that's difficulty 1. And then the other side of the coin is tasks to avoid. So this is the thing where if there's something in the scene, if it's really hot, if you spend 2 or 3, maybe 4 threat for a beam to fall from the ceiling, and you have to make a difficulty, I'd probably just say 1 task to get out of the way. Now, if you were fearful, like Hoshi, or if you had come down with the common cold, like Lieutenant Reed, that trait could be invoked, and that could increase the difficulty to 2 for that avoid task. So that's sort of an interesting thing, where that moment when you go from the narration into the task, that's the hardest thing to learn about this game. And it's the thing that our group has struggled with the most, is like, why can't we get to a die roll? And so my advice here is that, as much as I just talked all this to death, all this, like, whether there should be a die roll and whether traits should apply and so on, the rules are pretty like, they're pretty chill. Like, they just basically say, like, most tasks will have it, like, it's okay to be chill and not be super analytical about whether traits are escalating the difficulty. And so this is what colors the rest of kind of setting difficulty besides traits. Because I think generally, like, escalating difficulty with traits it's hard to do, it's time consuming, and it's, like, not as fun as traits working towards, like, you have to do a task or you don't get to do a task. Like, that's a much more fun aspect of traits. So more routine or straightforward tasks may have a difficulty of 0. So, like, piloting the shuttle and docking it with the bird of prey is probably, like, they do that every day on Enterprise. They dock their shuttle pods every day, all day, every day. But if somebody makes a mistake, or if it takes a long time to do it, because I mean, if anyone here watching the stream has watched this docking of a cargo craft to the International Space Station, sometimes it's fast, sometimes it takes forever. And the question is, if it takes less time, they can start unloading. They can, the astronauts can do extra activities. That's momentum. And so the question about, like, why are you rolling a difficulty 0 task? It's, would it matter if people had more time and kind of, or more esprit de corps, or, if it would set up a ball for something down the line? And that's where difficulty 0 tasks, that's where you might be rolling for them. But they are routine and straightforward things. Okay, so let's talk about, this is the interesting thing, is you don't have to start at 1. And in fact, the rules have a lot of things that start at 2. And Lord knows there are some things that start at 3. and in the Starship Combat section. And so let's talk through a little bit of why things would be higher. And I think, it's like, is it complicated? Um, like, how many variables are in play? So with Create Advantage, you're trying to do something beyond the immediate moment. You're not just trying to do something, you're trying to anticipate how you might help yourself or help someone else do something later. Like either unlock the possibility of doing it or making it easier for people, because that's what advantages do. So it's complicated. And let me know how the audio is, because I'm not really talking directly into the capsule here, and I know that it is sort of a directional mic. But that's sort of a little bit of a walkthrough of some of that stuff, of like why the higher difficulties come into play. And I think an iconic one is chart course in the Starship Combat section is default difficulty 3. Why would it be so hard to like plot ahead? Why is that 3? And the answer, I think, is because it's really complicated to do that in a Starship Combat encounter situation. Because I've invoked that task, I've looked at that task in the book, and I've said, oh, it's 3, because it says that in the book. And the reason that it's 3 is because you have to be helping the guy at the helm. You have to be doing it under the pressure of something that approaches a Starship Combat. And you have to do it so well that it is helpful. Like, you're not just over there just kind of like giving the guy advice, because that would be an assist. So you're trying to set it up so that it's permanently easier for the other guy to do his job. And so that's naturally, I think, really complicated. And it's complicated to get done fast enough to matter in it. So it's the insufficient time plus 1 difficulty, and then complex plus 1 difficulty. You can think of it that way. But you can get up into 4, 5, 6, type difficulties, and those generally players really just, my experience is that if you kind of spell out that a task is going to be higher than about difficulty 3, it has to be a do or die moment, or it has to be something where it's sort of central to a scene and they're setting it up. They're going to hike the ball, and that's sort of part of it. So let's get over back into stream chat, and let's see. Okay, so we've got some stuff coming in. And I should shift. This is the scene we want to talk in. Okay. Okay. So should enemy characters roll tasks other than shooting, assuming they're not Delta Force trained? So this is an interesting one. Okay. So generally, one of the things that I will do is that, for that ticking clock type scenario, enemy characters rolling a task is one of the ways that I will add to threat for other stuff. So it's not so much like that I'm pushing the character. Hi, Jason Lapel. Interesting, clever spelling. I think I figured it out. Okay, so the question is about whether enemy characters should roll kind of non-combat tasks around. And the same question of like, is failure interesting is the first thing. And then would the degree of success matter? And so those are the questions that I'm asking about. Should an enemy get to roll for it? Because really, if enemies are getting to roll, and this goes back to the Power by the Apocalypse thing, if enemies get to roll 2 die 20, then they will be generating threat generally, because the target numbers in the system are like typically between 11 and 15. And I did the math once, but basically, if you have a focus applies and your target number is about 14, then you have a 94% chance of success with a difficulty 1 task. So, as a game master, you're still making you're still making someone roll for something that they have a 94% chance of succeeding at in this game. JC in lapel. Okay. I'll spend time at another point in my life trying to decode that one. But so why would we be rolling for something that has that high of a chance of success? And the question is that the failure must be interesting. A, B, the complications must be interesting. As in, if the guy takes too long, or he really like beads of sweat are piling up on his forehead, or he goes home and he needs a drink after performing what should have been easy, then that would be things that kind of were complications. I can think of other kind of less personal complications. But the interesting thing is that in a lot of points in the rules, when it talks about a complication, like for example, success at cost, when you offer success at cost, it says explicitly it's a complication on the character. Okay, but we were talking about NPCs getting tasks. Generally, I think that my preference is for opposed tasks. Like if the enemies are trying to do something right in front of the characters, A, and then B, if it's not part of the scene, like if the enemies have already kind of set up what they're doing, then they've already done it, and the characters are there to stop them or to intercede, because it's the dramatic part of the story is the protagonist intervention. So that's I think part of the answer is basically for me, no, I don't roll for NPCs if it's not on camera. That's one of the things that I will say. If the characters say like we are trying to stop the Romulans from escaping this solar system, like I want to stop them from going to warp, then the moment that the Romulans are trying to go to warp, that will be some kind of scene that the players can get into. It might be an opposed task. The Romulans might be trying to nullify an advantage that the players have created. That might be. There's a number of ways to go about that, but I think that's another place where I would have the enemy's role is to negate traits that the players have in their back pocket. So like I negate the human trait. For example, humans are scrappy and combative, and they are argumentative and upstarts, and they're full of moxie. So an example of that is what is it, Gul Madred? There are four lights. He's trying to break the human trait off of Picard. And it's at least difficulty 2 to break that off of him. It might be that Picard keeps kind of throwing up value complications in his way too. Like Picard might say like create a value complication for himself that is sort of, it's a trait on his character now, and it's between Madred getting what he wants and it is now another trait. And so generally getting rid of traits is difficulty 2. And so that's one place where I think some traits, some enemy tasks, and those are scenes that are on camera. Like Madred torturing Picard is a scene. It's not for every table. I have not gone there myself, as far as like my RPG side of Trek, but that's an example of kind of situations where I would be rolling dice for the NPCs. And another reason why to roll dice for the NPCs for the harder things is that they will have to spend down the threat pool. You'll have to spend down the threat in order to get them the dice to try and succeed. And then I think another side of that is that I've enjoyed enemies rolling complications. Or adversaries, like the nasty admiral, or the other kind of by the book captain that's kind of getting in the way of the captain. If she rolls a complication, she might take a shine to one of the player characters' ship's officers, and she might be thinking, this guy's a good guy, he's just got a bad commander, I'm going to go easy on him. And that's one of those things that it's challenged me a lot to write complications for NPCs when they roll them. But unless I put myself into that situation where I'm rolling the dice for NPCs, I don't go there. And at first, I just said, "Oh, NPC rolled a complication. Oh, I'll just turn it into a threat. I'll just ignore it, or sorry, I'll spend down to ignore it, or vice versa. When the players rolled complications, I just turned it into threat, which is fine. You can do that, but there's other sides to this game. Okay, so what are some guidelines for increasing the complication range? This is a good one. Okay, so there is the chapter in the book that has the nebula classes and the gravimetric distortion class, the spatial anomalies, and so you can be in a nebula 3, and so the complication range is +3. That's not very useful. So this is why this is a good question. So what does complication range increasing mean? And I think my answer to that is it's not really it doesn't increase the danger, because you can't roll more it's not like you ever get to the point where you can roll two, like you can only roll as many complications as you're rolling dice, is what I mean to say. And you can only roll complications when you have to roll, like when you don't have enough time, when failing is interesting, when like it has to be in that situation that is a task. So what is increased complication range in that moment? And I think that the answer is it's an increased chance of failure of risk events. Sorry, that's what I meant. It's an increased chance of risk events. And it's just an increased chance that a risk event will occur. So I don't want to steal anybody else's work, but I did kind of go back and forth with Jim Cushman, who's I play SCA with, and he was working on kind of some stuff, and so we said that we kind of started coming up with names for different kinds of complication range. And so like +1 complication range was increased risk, and then +2 complication range, so 1920 was acceptable risk. So 20 was normal risk, 19 was acceptable risk, 18 was increased risk, and I think 17 was not advised or against regulation. Like this is not within Starfleet parameters. And then 16, going down to 16, was like James T. Kirk all the way, like a normal day for James T. Kirk. And so that's one. That's the semantics of it. But what I would say, in addition to the semantics, is things coming up. Like how does it like it's tangential. That's complications are kind of tangential to the question of success or failure, because when we talked about the types of task, there's the task to do something. I credit to Jim in large part, because I think it's mostly him. That, I mean, we went back and forth, but it's his baby. I'm never gonna make a video about it, and it's good. Yeah, compliments. But it's good enough that I think it bears repeating here. So, all right. All right, so complications are tangential, and by that I mean that they're not the question of success or failure. So there's the task to do, there's the task to avoid something bad happening to you, and then there's the tasks that are both. So you're already rolling to see if like a bad thing will happen to you in those other, I'm going to shut down the core breach before I get killed by a plasma surge, for example. So this increased complication range means something else. So it can mean like that there's kind of the sparking is kind of cascades of sparks are all over engineering, and my character's running around like this, um, and they might something might catch their clothing on fire as they're running through main engineering. It's going to take a while for the clothing to catch on fire, or that might make you do a task. 'Cause complications are they what is a complication? It's two threat, or it's a trait on your character that takes a difficulty 2 task to remove. So it's an opportunity cost in the sense that, like, if we were in a moment by moment environment, getting rid of it would take at least that long. So what are the sorts of things in the environment that, like, are getting more frequent? So if we go to Ryza and we're trying to gather information, we might bump into hot babes, and get really distracted. Um, for example, um, so like so the increased complication range is sort of that. You might start feeling your character might start having ungentlemanly thoughts, or that he's distracted. I might put distracted from your duties as a complication on a character, because you can succeed with a complication, and you can succeed handily, really. Like, for example, if you're rolling just 2 die 20, you could roll within your focus range. You could roll a 1. I don't know how this is seems fun to do this, but I don't know how fun. And then you could roll a 20 with your other die, and so that you could be generating momentum. You could be helping your buddies out and making the mission go smoother. That's what it means to make it happen with momentum. But you also have got this complication on you. Yeah, Kirk is the bellwether for romantic complications. Absolutely. And I think that's one example of it. Another example of it can be like the sorts of situations where Data and Spock run into problems because they don't get it. Like Data, when he takes command of the Sutherland in Redemption Part 2. So he's got this. His command discipline is fine, but he's in this situation where his species trait is getting in the way. It's never going to prevent him from succeeding, and that's why Data stands up for himself and he says, "Yo, why am I not in charge of a ship as we're doing this?" And Picard says, "Oh, yeah, I guess you're right. I guess I just was thinking maybe it might get complicated." All puns intended. Another example of this actually would be in Gambit. What is it, Gambit Part 2? When Riker and Picard are off the Enterprise, and so Data's got the red uniform on, and Data and Worf get into a tiff. And they have to go. Data says, "See me in my office," and they have to do this difficulty 2 task together. And I think so Data's doing the primary. He's removing that complication. He's saying, "Get this, like we need to get this out of our system." And Picard is often, that's one of the things that he does is kind of get it out of our system. So personal circumstances, compromising personal circumstances are one of the places where I think increased complication range comes into play. Another side of that I did a time travel episode with TNG characters in the TOS era, and that's just kind of doing something which would leave behind a trace or betray that you're from the future. And that's the sort of thing where, like, the complication can just become threat, because at some point we shatter the timeline. That the threat gets too bad that it blows up. So that's sort of one of the examples of that. And that kind of does tie in with the ideas of, like, the nebulas and the and the asteroid fields and the terrain features that are in the in the book as things that increase complication. It's like, well, I'm just trying to fly through space, man. Oh, but well, yeah, there is space lightning. Kind of might get in our way of flying through space. And so that's sort of, so how much does complication range increase? Um, I think the every direction you look, like everywhere you go, you'll step on a landmine is the highest level of complication range. Um, we do see that in the book with when I think computers are totally busted, but there's some of the systems when they get really, really busted, they really increase complication. Like no matter which way I turn, no matter what button I press, something's breaking on this ship because it's just we are up a creek, and so that's sort of that's where the maximum of complication range is. The minimum is just normal. Like sometimes things come up, and then increase by one is we should probably have a heads up, and so on. So let's get to some frequently overlooked rules. I think I said to my wife that this was going to take like 30 minutes, and we have been doing this for a while, which is fun. But this is where I think we'll wind down. So let's. I want to get this on the screen. So I don't know. This is just it's an episode I watched recently, and it's one of the episodes that I watched as if it was STA, and I think it fit really good. So that's why I used it. But I understand if it's not everybody's favorite episode. It's not really mine either. So let's talk about these kind of things in the book that I think they jumped out at me. The thing that I already mentioned was the what's it called? Yeah. So any trait introduced to the scene after the start of the scene is to threat. I found that in the rules one day, and I thought that was cool. Another thing that I found in the rules one day is when an NPC's value is challenged. So that means the NPC's value is out of the picture. He's not going to be able to spend determination on it. But that also generates 3 threat. Like you've yanked the pillars of that guy's worldview out from underneath of him, and it makes 3 threat. So only notable and major NPCs have values, and that's an important thing to point out. But it's kind of useful, I think, as far as one of those questions of like, why is the clock ticking? Why is the threat going higher? Because I think it's important to link that to the fiction. Okay. So the first thing is value complications. When it comes to determination, I think that it's much more practical to earn determination with value complications. So as the GM, you can propose them, and I think it's even more fun when the players propose them, but I haven't really seen that happen yet. And I think that's because the challenge value mechanic is speaking louder. But that's unfortunate because when you challenge a value, it gets crossed. You can't use it. You can't spend based on it. So the thing about value complications is that if you get a point of determination by making a complication for yourself, you still can use that value to spend. You can say, man for all seasons, Riker. So man for all seasons can mean I love to date my coworkers. And so he makes that complication for himself. But then he can use man for all seasons to pull out his trumpet and lighten the mood when the Bolian delegation beams aboard. So he still has that ability to just lay down some light in the mood later on. Whereas if you challenge it, it's out. So I've been playing a Vulcan that named Tanera, and she tries to experiment with jokes, a little bit like Savick, but then a little bit more up the ladder. She's been trying to have fun with that kind of stuff, and she realized that it was getting in the way of her duties and keeping her comrades safe. They were in an away team situation that got a little bit escalated, and she noticed that there's her subordinates were bantering a ton, and so she realized she just had to put that part of herself away. So I challenged the value. It's not there for the rest of the episode. We're not done with that episode. So value complications are cool because it's there. It can increase the difficulty. It's really fun. It can put a pause on gameplay. If it's not, the more major the complication proposed is, or if it's sort of too minor and it won't affect any tasks, then somebody might say no. So there's a middle of the road there, and I think that takes some learning. But at least you'll get the determination, and you'll be able to spend it, which is unlike challenge. And then you, as the game master, can nudge the player. You can say, "Hey, do you want a point of determination? I think you do." Okay, so next thing, avoid injury by complication. You dodge around the corner, but only just in time, and you get grazed in your shoulder, and you do have a phaser burn in that arm that will cause some difficulty. For example, the thing is that doesn't generate any threat, and that's a big deal. That's the thing, is that the more threat that you generate in combats, in man-to-man combats, the more enemy reinforcements come into play, and the more that the enemies can buy extra dice to make their attacks really effective. Because it spins out of control. If the players are making immediate spends for extra dice in combats, that means, you can just really bring on the waves of Borg drones, for example. Or it can get to the point where there's so many Borg drones that it's a reversal, and then the players wake up in a containment cell, which is what happened in that episode with Lore and the Rogue Borg. I can't remember the name. So group challenge. This is really fun, and this is something which is really, I thought, is overlooked. So this can be just a momentary thing it's like the entire team has to chip in to make this happen. So one of the things that we did in an episode is that the away team was trying to escape from a dome, and there was robots everywhere, kind of hunting for them. They're sort of robots pretending to be humans, but they don't really know that they're robot. Blah blah blah. But anyway, they're trying to hunt down the humans before they escape, because they want their genetic material to make real boys, and so one person's task might not get them all the way home. So the cool thing that I did is I combined group challenge with extended task. And so that way, different characters had to chip into the extended task. The different people had to be called upon to devise ways to get past these kind of different groups running through the streets and waving their tricorders around and sniffing in dumpsters. Different methods had to be tried, because if the same guy continued to lead the way, then the difficulty would increase. So this is sort of, it's more complicated than this could be better phrased. In a group challenge, when a character attempts or assists, they cannot assist again. So there you go. If you roll any dice or you throw in your assist dice on another guy's task, you can't assist again. Second, and then after you've thrown dice once, your tasks are difficulty +1, not unlike Swift Task, and that can and you can keep doing tasks, but they'll keep getting harder. And I think one interesting example of that might be Spock in Galileo 7, is that at a certain point Spock is cracking, like he cannot do it all, and other people are going to have to pick it up, because this is survival. Okay, folks. So let's take one last look at the stream chat, and I think we'll call it a night. Okay. So you can avoid it. Yes, so you can avoid injury with momentum, which is really rare. That if the player is getting injured, it's often because they were in a situation like things were not going well. But say they get ambushed, and he takes enough damage. That would be a really good example of in the fiction of the world. Because this is a fun thing is to really visualize how these spends are happening in the fiction. So if the players have 6 momentum, they have got this. They are methodically moving through this dungeon. They're moving through these hallways, space hallways, because we know that's happened. And they arrive, they know that the bad guys are out there. And the bad guys ambush them. They jump from around the corner and they shoot their phasers. And it does injure one of the protagonists. He dodges behind a piece of cover just in time because they were that alert and they were that ready to go. So that's a momentum spend. Like for example, the security chief could do a really good kind of the difficulty 0 perception check preceding the combat. That could have gone really well, and so that in that case it would be a momentum spend. Threat for avoid injury can be risk taking. It can't. One of the interesting things that I've thought about is that it can be that you might kind of be exchanging fire right back at him. Like you might make it so that guy really can't land a good blow at you because you're kind of just suppressing fire, and so you're more exposed down the line, and so there's more threat in the pool, and sorry, I got a little distracted. So there's more threat in the pool, and the fun thing about that is that you're more exposed. Like enemies are going to have more dice to do bad stuff to you, and so like you avoided the injury, but you caused risks for your teammates. All right. And you still take the stress. Absolutely. And that's an important thing to note is that sooner or later even 1 point of damage is going to start causing an injury. In which case, like, you got to get beamed out, or you might have to put your hands up, or lay down and kind of surrender your fate to what happens next. I haven't played a combat that went on that long. I have seen a character kind of say, "All right, I'm good. I'm not going to avoid." But one of the reasons I think is because we're not observant of the avoid by accepting a complication. But it accumulates. Yeah, the stress going down to 0 is a really, really fun mechanic, and I've loved doing that with environmental damage. Like 2 stress. You're in a cold locker. You're in a cold sub-zero sleeper ship. 2 stress. Trying to open a door. All right, you move into the next area. You're kind of continuing to check the place out, but it's cold down here. 2 stress. And that it creates a sensation of dread. Just that kind of that damage over time. And it also means that anything that comes out, like any kind of combat, is that much more threatening. So being injured can cause either threat. So generally, okay, so if you're injured, you're out of the combat. That's the way the mechanic is set up. Is that if you take 5 damage, or if you've gone down to 0 hit points, stress, then you have an injury. And so the question is, are you going to avoid it? And I mean, generally the answer is probably yes, because you don't want to. You're out of the game. You don't want like that. A character doesn't want that. So the question is, how do they avoid? And so those are the answers. It's basically those 3. Okay. So can you tell me about they between game changes? I don't have a first yet. Yesterday was my first. So between game changes. I think you mean like like kind of changing around your character. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think if you have a milestone, I think it's really useful to spend them to kind of change as you get your footing as far as like what your group considers to be a task and sort of what the subject matter of the campaign is. Like if you are a student of Klingon culture, you could call that a focus on your character sheet. Um, is that going to affect? Is that going to actually apply to tasks? Does it apply to the tasks that you're doing um, at your table? Like, are you finding circumstances where you're able to do tasks like that? Um, and that's a really good question. And so that's where I think spending milestones, the normal milestones, the kind of little itty bitty ones, I think that's very useful to um, to kind of tune up your character, and that's where I think normal milestones really generally like you kind of you get more and more optimal without getting better. Like you tune towards the subject matter of the campaign, and I think that's really fun. So let me see if I might have something about normal milestones around. Well, we can just go. We can go to my slide with the rule book, but I do want to see if I can say hi to my wife before she goes to bed, because tomorrow night is the normal weekly game for our group. There it is. Okay, so milestones. So there's two sections with milestones. The important thing to note is that the player group, the player section, they're identical between the player and the game master section, but the player section is just generally the errata that are out. Just generally just fix the game master repeat of that section. It's one of those things where I'm hoping for a second edition of this game, because there could be more cool stuff in this book, if was less repeated stuff. I will just say that. Okay, milestones. So arc milestones, normal milestones. Here we go. So, so out of game change, doing things to your character between sessions or between episodes. Discipline swaps. Like I think if you're moving from a 3 to a 4, and vice versa, you could do this. You could do that all day, every day, and it doesn't even. You don't even need to really explain it. Like today, John Luke is feeling more scientific, and he's feeling more archaeological. Today, John Luke is feeling more like he is going to shove the ensign off of the con and steer the Enterprise himself. Now it happens before the session, but it's a way of expressing sort of different sides of the character, because oh, Commander Riker's a pilot. Oh, Geordi's good at flying shuttlecraft. Like they're not things that we see all the time. So I think that's probably the most fun way to use it. Changing focuses I talked about a little bit ago. Changing up a supporting character. Boy, I don't know. Like I feel like it's just more fun to make more of them. Yeah, that's what I have to say about that. So saving them. It's basically a point of determination. If you save a milestone and then you spend it, it's not restricted by it's not restricted to values. It's something you learned from that previous occasion, and it's pretty powerful. I've seen it used, and interesting thing is I don't see it used as much as it could. But these normal milestones, I think they come a lot, basically, because like we only play for 2.5 hours, so yeah, I will often give these at the halfway point of the episode, or they're at least one per episode. Whereas the spotlights, it's like half of the episodes are spotlight episodes, and then so that means that or if half of them are spotlight episodes for each character, which means that after 4 episodes, then you might get an arc milestone. You might get your first arc milestone. And really, just the arc milestones. Those are the only ones that really level up anything on the character sheet. But boy, do they ever when it happens. Let me just say, like, the advancement is tactile, it is sensed, it is meaningful. Like, when you hit an arc milestone, it's really going to change how strong your character is. So I haven't done a video about character advancement. I know there's a lot of people that say there's not, like, that say that in Star Trek Adventures there's not much to be done. And I say au contraire. Play the game and get an arc milestone and get back to me. Okay, so let's look at the stream chat, and I think I will retire here. It's been really fun. Hopefully some of this stuff has been useful, and at least it's sort of unlocked some worldview. As far as that thing about, like, Power by the Apocalypse and, like, playing towards the task and, like, meta gaming the pool and so on, my view is that, that always stay intimate with the fiction and know why the momentum is useful between the characters. It always is, by the way. I mean, like, that's the rules, is that momentum is useful for your buddies, but how, it can really bring you into the world of Star Trek. And the same goes for kind of, like, how does your character sense or feel that the pool is different, and that there's less or more threat. How does he hear the music? And I definitely like to think of it in that in-character perspective. But I will say that the game does want you to look for, it wants you to say Star Trek stuff to arrive at difficulty 1 tasks. Because eventually you're going to hit the difficulty 3, 4, 5 moments. You're going to hit the swells. And if you have the momentum, if you got 5, if you got 6 momentum from kind of doing something that was challenging, that you didn't quite have enough to do, but you felt brave, you felt like a Starfleet guy, and you did step up and find those moments, those challenging. That's what difficulty 1 is. It's challenging. If you find those moments to challenge yourself, then the team will be stronger when it comes time. And I think that's just encoded into the game. And so is the crunch time, because the Game Master has that pile of threat. Is it a metagame? I don't know. I know that we're playing a Star Trek episode with heroic dudes, and that the games, the sessions, and when you look at it, like, this is a Star Trek episode, and it's gonna push these guys to their max, and they're also gonna bring stuff that, like, wow, I cannot believe Captain Picard is amazing. Because that's the thing about this game, is that these are Captain Picard level characters. They're at very least Janeway, B'Elanna, Tuvok level characters. I mean, no disrespect. But what I mean to say is that that's what's different about all the 2-20 games, is that these really, you don't start at level 1, per se, and it's a lot of fun, because there's a lot, you get to play in this high level environment, and it's really playable within it. And so I've enjoyed it a great deal. I'm gonna go say hi to my wife. Have a good night, everybody.